Hey there, guys. Robert Rule of Two Review here, and today is Shadow of Mordor stealing from Assassin's Creed. So a couple of days ago, this really fantastic gameplay walkthrough trailer for the upcoming, semi-upcoming Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor game was released on the internet. It was showing a bunch of gameplay for the first time, and it looks really, really excellent. So that's kind of the first part of news to this whole story, is that we finally saw gameplay. It was a great walkthrough with one of the developers letting us know about everything going on and explain the different unique abilities and what we were seeing. And it was really cool. I'm not gonna lie, it was badass. The sword play and the fight ability that you have with your character in that game is really, really super impressive. The world, the facial animations that we were able to see, and it was even, I believe, an alpha stage. Is what we were showing. They mention it in the video, and now I can't remember. I'm pretty sure it was an alpha stage, so it was a pretty early, incomplete yet very accurate kind of setting for the game, and it was really neat to see it in this kind of form. The facial animations for some of the enemies and stuff you were fighting were awesome. Really, really cool stuff. So it looked great. It looked really fun. Combat looked amazing. So it was really super exciting. What was interesting is, the game is also going to be great because it is set between The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. So it's going to have a lot of fun kind of lore adding depth to it that I think is going to be really neat. Similar to filling the gaps in like the Star Wars trilogies and stuff like that. It's neat to kind of see them doing this sort of stuff in the gaming space for Middle Earth, especially, we're smack dab in the middle of a new Hobbit, a new Middle Earth trilogy with the Hobbit movies going on, which rock. And it's a really exciting time for all this stuff. Great time to release a game like this. It looked really, really good. So the fact that it looked good aside, the very interesting thing that happened is the game itself is now being accused by one of the programmers for Assassin's Creed 2, I guess specifically. I have his job title here in a minute. Somebody who basically worked, for Ubisoft on Assassin's Creed 2. And is making the claim that Shadow of Mordor is stealing the code from Assassin's Creed 2. And I think that's why this became a news story and even, somewhat of a controversy, if you want to call it that, is because it's the term stealing is what's being thrown around. And of course, that's never a fun thing to be hearing. So the gentleman for Ubisoft who made this claim, his name is Charles Randall, and I'm perusing some of the information that I found. I'm on GameSpot here, where I found most of this information on this article, and it mentions that he is credited as a team lead in AI fight system and senior gameplay programmer for Ubisoft Toronto, and that was the work that he focused on, primarily combat stuff, it says, for Assassin's Creed 2. And he basically started shooting out a bunch of frickin' tweets, man. And these tweets were basically calling out the game, the devs for Shadow of Mordor. Shadow of Mordor is being developed by, it's a team I haven't really heard a whole lot of. They're Monolith Productions. It's published by Warner Brothers. Monolith Productions is the team, developing and creating the game itself. And this guy, Charles Randall, just, went nuts. He wasn't being overly mean. I'll read a few of the tweets that are listed here again in the GameSpot article. But he's basically calling stuff out. He said, what was the first one? He says, this is the most interesting thing, actually. So he says, I know I don't have any legal rights to what I did on Assassin's Creed 2, but I sure hope I get a special thanks on that Middle-earth game. This was, I think, even the first day after this 8-minute gameplay footage had been released. I'm going to link that below. You've probably seen it, but it doesn't hurt to, for me to link it in case you want to actually check it out. It is awesome. Despite all this controversy, whatever, if you want to get an idea of what you're looking at and where this is coming from, it's a good gameplay demo to watch. The game looks great, but you can also compare it to Assassin's Creed 2. Something else he says is, I'm fine with it if people know what it is, but I think that they are going to, but if they think they're going to sneak this under the radar, so much nope. That was his exact wording. So it's weird. He mentioned some things that are kind of informative to me and were helping me shape my opinion as I was reading this news. It's interesting that on one respect, I like the fact that he's saying I don't so much care, but I also want them or people to just know that this is what I think is happening. So I get the idea that he's like, it's not like I'm going to stop you or say you can't or shouldn't use my code or whatever. But just don't try to hide it. And I get that. I mean, if that's really what's happening, I would get that they should say, oh yes, we're using the Assassin's Creed 2 engine, what have you, blah, blah, blah. Just let it happen. And apparently that seems to be no big deal. And I appreciate that. However, Here's the other thing. The first tweet that I read, there's some more here too, but the first one that I just read to you now, that was the one that basically defined my opinion as I read it. Because when I kind of was hearing about this news, I think it was the day before yesterday that it broke. Maybe it was yesterday. It was, I was like, oh, like that, I guess that kind of sucks. It seems kind of weird that somebody would do that. And it sucks that, a team is using something that isn't theirs to create their own game and maybe trying to lie about it. I thought that might have been the case, hence why Ubisoft or somebody might have been upset. And I was like, well, the game certainly still looks good overall, but yeah, this information kind of sucks. However, when I read this, it kind of explained some of the details that I wasn't really quite sure of. That sort of made my opinion go sway in the opposite direction. And again, what he says is, I know that I don't have any legal rights to what I did on Assassin's Creed 2. Blah, 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 blah. So to me, that was the big key factor. When in thinking about this for myself, and, some people may know this information, other people's may not. I happen to be someone who really doesn't know or didn't know going into this story exactly how this stuff works. If you create a code or what's the word I'm looking for? Just like a tool that is being used for an asset. That was the word. Hello. A certain asset to be used into creating a game or an engine. I don't know how that stuff is patented and owned by certain people or certain companies. I know the Unreal Engine is the very famous engine that everyone just knows of by name and talks about, and it's all over the place. A lot of different people use it, and I know that was something that was created by what was it, Epic? I think Epic Games created that. Cliff Bleszinski, I believe that was the team, the people responsible for that initially. And then they realized it made sense to just start outsourcing it and selling it and making it available for other people to use. So it became, I think, just, free game. And I think that that's the way it is with a lot of this stuff. So again, so what I'm saying is I don't know how that stuff is owned and patented. So that's why I was like, well, maybe this is kind of shady that, this game is using these assets and they really shouldn't be. But then this guy says, there are no legal rights to what he did on Assassin's Creed 2, which means if within the gaming space, it is common for these kinds of assets and tools to be made available to other people, and it's not stuff that is owned specifically by the person or team who used these abilities to create certain games. If that's the case, then I kind of feel you should shut up about it. I feel like you're making a big stink just to be the douchebag who wants to make a big stink. And I mean, I say that with, take that with a semi grain of salt because I'm only taking so much of this information from a tweet, Granted, this guy is somebody who's in the industry, worked on the code himself, and he made the claim. So I assume he's correct in saying, it's making it sound like these kinds of assets and when these things happen, it's okay for them to be used. And maybe it's common. And, when creating stuff for a game, you're just using what's available and there's nothing really wrong with it. So if let's say that Monolith Productions is actually using the exact Assassin's Creed 2 code that Charles Randall is talking about, if that's not owned by Ubisoft or him, and that is like kind of free game, then no one wants to hear about the fact that maybe the only thing you ever achieved in your life is working on Assassin's Creed 2 for a little bit, and now that someone else is using it, and you want to just start making this stink on the internet and this public controversy just to get your name back out there and to remind people you did this one great thing at one time. I mean, I don't know that that's the case, so I'm not trying to sound that aggressive towards this guy, but it just seems like when I read that tweet, that was the thought that went through my head, that this doesn't need to be made a big deal if he doesn't have a legal right. If he does have a legal right, if there is a real actual legal issue going on here, and Monolith Productions really is doing something unfair, and that is, something I don't know how this legal stuff happens, like I said, so I don't know if they're breaking the law, quote unquote, or not. If they're breaking the law, obviously it's a different story, in which case I would say this guy is kind of correct, and it kind of sucks that they're doing that. I will say they're making a really kick-ass looking game out of it, so on the gaming side, we all win, and I'm really glad. I'm excited to play the game regardless, but that doesn't take away from the concepts of what's happening here. So I don't know. I mean, it kind of rests. I'd be really curious to hear what you guys think. I mean, I just don't know. I don't 100% know what to think because, like I said, I feel like I'm not sure exactly the details. All the information about this news story doesn't really say it doesn't mention the implications of what's going on. No one really says, Shadows of Mordor is doing a terrible thing. They're breaking the law or the unspoken code of the gaming industry and developers by doing this. And they're also not saying it's not a big deal. This person from Ubisoft has no right to make these claims. Even if it's true, it's not a big deal. I mean, the fact that nobody is really giving us these sort of facts, from websites and people who report and are in the journalism side of the industry who would probably know the answers to this stuff, whereas I do not 100%. They're not kind of telling us, and that is really frustrating. So it was was sort of hard for me to want to bring this up on an episode and talk about it because it's hard for me to say, like I said, which side I stand on. I really just need those other few facts. But I figured it couldn't hurt to talk about it so I could at least share, depending on which side of this whole argument falls on, how I actually felt. If Monolith Productions is doing something unfair to this gentleman and the work that he did, then how dare they? They are completely wrong. I agree 100%. And I hope that it wouldn't come out and then end up kind of destroying the game or preventing it from coming out or whatever, or they have to redo it. I hope that that's not the case because it looks really good. So I want the game to come out as is. Looks great. I want to play it. I hope nothing happens to affect it. But if they're doing something wrong, they're doing something wrong, in which case, whatever kind of punishments or legal or actions need to be taken afterwards need to happen. If it's not a big deal, and this guy was 100% correct in what he said, I have no legal rights to what happened, to what's going on. I just really want to shout out and kudos and people to tell me I'm great so I can just, send out a bunch of tweets and piss people off, then that guy is completely out of line and would be acting like a douchebag and someone I would have zero respect for now, even though he's made some very popular games. I myself am not an Assassin's Creed guy. I tried 3 of them, including Assassin's Creed 4 just a few weeks ago, and I just cannot get into them. There is definitely, fundamentally nothing wrong with those games, and I've said that for a while, and I know it especially after playing Black Flag for a little bit. They're completely great, well-made games with cool settings and awesome things going on, and I should, for all intents and purposes, I totally should love those games. But it's just one of those rare cases where it just doesn't speak to me. That happens. It's fine. I got nothing against them. People love the hell out of them. They review and sell really well. So awesome. But this guy, he's potentially really sucking right now and doing something not cool. So I don't know. I guess that's kind of where I rest on that whole topic. What do you guys think? At the end of the day, it really just depends on the details. I hope at the end, the number one thing is I hope nothing really shady is happening, and I really, really hope that nothing happens to affect the release and creation of Shadow of Mordor. Okay, one other quick piece of news I wanted to talk about. This is the third time in the last few weeks that I've had a reason to talk about Left Behind, the Last of Us DLC that's coming out now on February 14th, Valentine's Day. Just a few weeks, 2.5 weeks. Oh my freaking God, I cannot wait. It's going to be amazing. So in my last few videos, I've talked about and speculated, all sorts of things from the length and the meat of the Left Behind campaign that's coming out, from the release date before we knew what it was going to be, the pricing structure, what the story elements are going to, how it's going to affect Ellie and the overall story as it leads into the events of The Last of Us, all sorts of good things. And one of the big things I talked about was if this was, because it was rumored to be true, if this was going to be the last story element that is going to be added to The Last of Us as we know it. There is multiplayer stuff, of course, that has released. But as far as the actual campaign and story and character related content, was this going to be the last of it? And if it is the last of it, what does that mean for the series and the story going forward? We know that Naughty Dog is a 2-team studio. We know that one team is working on the next Uncharted game, which I'm just going to call Uncharted for because it's obvious it will be. And we don't know what that other team is working on. Obviously, a lot of people want to think or assume or even hope, like myself, that they're making a sequel to The Last of Us. And I was basing a lot of my theories on if that was possible or not, based on what I thought might be happening with the DLC. If I thought that they were going to be releasing a few different story chapters for DLC over the next year or so, I would say that maybe they're going to finish out every part of the story element of The Last of Us they wanted to release and tell via the DLC, and their next game that isn't Uncharted might be a whole brand new game, a new series or something like that. If this was going to be the one and only extra content release for The Last of Us, then maybe that means that they do still have more story to tell, and they would do that in The Last of Us 2 for the PlayStation 4, the other game that they'd be working on. So basically the big news that came out today is it was confirmed that Left Behind will be the last story element, part of the piece of the package that is Last of Us to be released. So that's really interesting. It's also very exciting because where I find this article, it's mentioned that Naughty Dog is quoted saying that Left Behind will be a good length. That's kind of all he said. Will be a good length, but that was all I was hoping for. If this was the last story we're going to get for The Last of Us, the game that exists as it is, I want it to be as much as they can humanly possibly give us. Like, just give us as much as you can, and that's what we need. $15, I don't care how much I'm paying. Just make it really awesome. I think it's going to be, he says it's going to be a good length. I don't know what that means, but I'm just hoping that means it's several hours. And I'd like to be able to play it for like a few days and a few sittings to be able to go through it. That would be really exciting. But they have said that it's the only thing they have for The Last of Us, the PlayStation 3 game, The Last of Us. So moving on to the PlayStation 4. Well, okay, even before I do that, this to lend to my theory is when that game ended, and I'm not going to spoil it here, although I assume most of you, anyone who would listen to this has probably played it, but I still won't spoil it just in case. The way that game ended, it both makes you think, obviously there's more of a story to tell, and we need to find out what's going to happen next in something like a sequel or DLC. However, and even though I absolutely agree with that, and so I think that a sequel is incredibly possible and maybe even likely just because the game did so well. But I also have just my own personal feeling. I've expressed this to a few people. No one really seems to agree with me, and that is fine. But still, I have this theory and I stand by it, that part of me felt that the way they ended that game in such that seemingly ambiguous fashion, I wonder if, and I kind of felt that it was very purposeful. I think that they maybe wanted to leave it that way, and it kind of has this strange, odd feeling of that is where we mean for the story to end. That Naughty Dog really doesn't and never did plan on or expect to make a story after the final event, the final moment and scene from The Last of Us. If you haven't beaten it, this is probably really hard to grasp and understand, so I'm sorry. But for anyone who has beaten it, you probably know what I'm talking about. I completely recognize that most people think that there should be a sequel, and they're saying we want to make a sequel with that ending. And you wouldn't be wrong. I would not argue with you. But and I want that to be the case. I mean, just because I want more of it. But I also kind of like the idea of leaving it where they did, and in that, and like I said, that ambiguous fashion, and it just kind of ends, and it's like, wow, that's that story over. Holy cow. That would be really, really neat. And there's just some sort of aura and feeling that I got from the ending that kind of told me that was the case. Thinking a little bit more realistically, at the end of the day, we're a money and success and power-driven world. The game did really, really well. It sold very well. It reviewed fantastically. It was like everyone's game of the year, including my own. It was just so good. Since we know that they're a two-team studio, I mean, it would certainly make sense. All signs would point to they simply must be making The Last of Us 2 as well. We'll see if by the time Left Behind comes out and we've had a chance to play it, and I will most definitely be talking about that on one of my episodes here. And it will be completely spoiler filled. So just so you know now, 2 weeks ahead of time. But, depending on the events of that game, it's really going to be interesting to see if there's anything we get through Left Behind, which will be a prequel. So that's going to take place even before the first game, but you never know how they do this stuff. So depending on how certain things may happen, it may lend more or less credence to The Last of Us 2. It could do something and however they might do it, because they're very clever with their storytelling, it might let us know that there really is nothing else to tell afterwards. Or it might let us know that there's a lot of stuff that Naughty Dog still needs to tell us about this story and these characters and this world. So it's going to be really cool and exciting to see how that kind of plays out. I mean, obviously, it's going to rock just to have it to play. I think it's going to be probably one of the best releases of the entire year, and it's only going to be a few hours of a DLC campaign. But I know it's going to be that good because that's how good The Last of Us was. So that's kind of that, we know it's confirmed that it's the last story element. That's pretty good news because it lets us know that we can hopefully expect something coming in the future. Whatever Naughty Dog does next, hopefully it's The Last of Us 2. If it's something brand new, it would also be great. So we're just going to have to maybe see. Maybe they bring back Crash Bandicoot. Maybe that's their other game for the PlayStation 4 is a brand new Crash Bandicoot. How freaking cool would that be? I'm not going to lie, I'd be really excited. But that aside, The Last of Us 2 would be marvelous. In about 2.5 weeks, February 14th, Left Behind will be out. We'll all be playing through it. I'll make sure to make a video about it and how excited and amazing I know it's going to be. Okay, guys, thanks as always for tuning in. Of course, if you like what I'm doing with these videos, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel Rule of Two Review. I have a link to the Facebook page below, so please go and like that. You can find us on Twitter at Rule of Two Review, and also make sure to like the video if you enjoyed it, as well as share the video and share any of your comments and thoughts below. So thanks as always for tuning in, guys, and I will catch you next time.